Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session. The session is about the traditional academic publishing system and how it will change to accommodate and disseminate massive research output from the emerging world. So I welcome you all to the session. In order to answer that question, which is rather complex, I think we need to define what is the traditional academic publishing system. We also need to discuss what is the massive research output from the emerging world and how one must change to meet the other. Thank you very much. In order to do that, I have a panel assembled here. I'm very honored to be joined by Pippa Smart. Pippa is Editor-in-Chief for Learned Publishing. That is the official publication of the Association for Learned and Professional Society Publishers. She's also the Vice President and the President-elect of the European Association of Science Editors. Prior to that, she worked at Blackwell, Cabby, and Cambridge University Press. She's a member of INASP, which is a development organization that supports editors and publishers in the developing world. She's also set up the African Journals Online program and has been a consultant in the field for the last 10 years. On my right is Marianne Hollingsworth. I'm also pleased to be joined by you, Marianne. Marianne is Director of Publisher Relations at Clarivate Analytics, formerly Thomson Reuters, and prior to that, ISI. She's also the Associate Director, or was the Associate Director for the National Federation of Advanced Information Services. Prior to that, she was academic, corporate, and a public librarian. She's an active SSP member and has served on the board of directors at SSP and has been co-chair of the Education Committee. And she's also on the board of the National Information for Standards Organization. To the far right is Duncan McRae. He's Director of Open Access and Editorial at Wolters Kluwer. In that role, he develops and implements the open access policy for both Wolters Kluwer and for Medno's open access journals. Prior to that, he was managing editor for Neurosurgery, which is the official publication of the Congress of Neurological Surgeons. He was senior manager of editorial and editorial operations at Pri-Med, which is a leading CME provider, and he was managing editor of Brain Pathology, which is the official publication of the International Society of Neuropathology. And last, my name is Philip Purnell, and I was priorly a researcher. I held a post at the Institute of Psychiatry in London, and following that at the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry in Munich. I then went into the pharmaceutical industry, working for both AstraZeneca and UCB. So had I stayed there, I could have been in the competing conference in the other rooms on the other side of the hotel. But I didn't. I moved into the information world and spent 15 years at Thomson Reuters. And the last 5 years, I've been in Dubai in the Middle East. And I'm now heading up the professional services division of Knowledge E, a publisher, a niche publisher serving the emerging regions. So with no further ado, I would like to ask Pippa to take up to start off. Let me just put your presentation up.
Okay, so fantastic. Thank you very much, Phil, for inviting me to speak here and for all of you for turning up. So what I'd like to do is talk about the position of editors when we're looking at an increased number of articles coming from different regions of the world, particularly the emerging economies. And basically, I'd like to start by saying it's a big world out there. I mean, there's a lot of research being done, and there's some huge increases. Recent figures that have come out of the NSF have shown that although the global increase in articles is around about, they're tracking about 3-4%, the increases that are coming from places like India and China are up in the double figures. So annually, we're getting a huge amount more research coming out. And the journal that I edit, Learned Publishing, we're seeing this as well. And there are a couple of what are they called, Wordle things? Anyway, something I found on the internet. I've taken out the UK and the USA, but the blue are our reviewers for the last 2 years, and the sort of red and brown on this side are our author groups. And the UK and USA accounts for in each group about 50-60%, but the rest of them are coming from these countries. We've got reviewers from over 50 countries, which was amazing when I did it, and I checked the figures twice. And we've got authors coming from over 30 countries. And as you see there, China is a big contender. We're getting a lot of articles from China, which is, I think, in common with a lot of journals. We're getting a lot of content. It's a very big country. There's a lot of research. So there's a big wide world. There's a lot more articles coming out. And if we've got this, fantastic smorgasbord of articles and research come from all around the world, why is this a problem? This should be brilliant. This should be fantastic. And why is it a problem? Well, we have to say, guys, do we have a bit of a trust issue? And, are we trusting this research that's coming from all these other countries? A bit tricky here. And I'd like to sort of, expand some of this and say, actually, why do we think there are issues? Why are there problems with this research coming out? Because we're working in an environment where we should all be working on the same, on the same level playing field. We are all about getting the research more public so it can be used, so it can affect policies, so it can improve the welfare of everybody in the world. So you've got authors and you've got readers. And, the authors want to get their research out, the readers want to discover the best research. So that's great. But in between the authors and the readers, you've got a whole passel of people. You've got institutions. You've got publishers, either commercial, not-profit, organizational, institutional. And they have slightly different missions. They have slightly different mandates on actually what research they want to publish and what they want to make public. And then you've got the editors, you've got the reviewers. And I'd like you to take your pick, which one is the happy guy up there and which one is the one banging their head on the desk. And all of these people are putting barriers between getting research out and getting research understood. And so when we've got this enormous increase in research, actually, what are the problems and what are the editorial challenges that are being faced by editors from all around the world trying to deal with this tsunami, and in some cases it is a bit of a tsunami of content. So the first problem, language. Language, big problem, because I'm a native English speaker, and a lot of the international journals, probably the majority of them, are publishing in English. And yet, not all the world speaks English. A bit of a shock, I know, but there are a lot of other languages out there. And we're forcing authors to translate their research into English. And that's a hard call for a lot of people. I speak what I call holiday French. If you ask me to publish in a French journal, I can tell you now I would never get published. Language is a really big issue. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, bias. People are biased. I wish we weren't, and hopefully we can rise above it. And I think the talk yesterday afternoon was really quite inspirational about diversity. I'll say that word quite quietly because it's not diversity, it's about inclusion, and it's inclusion of all peoples. But people are biased, and we find that in peer review. People show bias against an article that comes from an institution they don't know versus an institution that they do know and they respect, and they come at it with different opinions. And so we have issues of bias that we need to overcome. We also have problems with ethics, and ethics is such a big issue within the editorial world. And just to say, for those of you I promised cat pictures, this is the cat picture. Ethics are a problem, and whilst there is a common understanding in many places about what is ethically correct and what is ethically incorrect, there are some subtle differences around the world. And I train editors and researchers in a lot of different countries, and there are some slightly different perspectives about what is considered ethical and unethical. And there are some real grey areas. So ethics, potentially a big issue. Another problem we have as well is inflation. Authors inflate their research, and of course they do. You know, they've done an itty-bitty research project, with a sort of over studying about 5 people, and they've drawn enormous global conclusions about this, and they're really proud of their research. So when they submit it to you, they tell you it's the best thing that's ever been published, because that's what authors do. I speak as an author here, not just as an editor. We think our stuff is the greatest, and that can be quite tricky to actually filter your way down as an editor, as a reviewer, and say, actually, guys, what is the real story underneath this article? And that's doubly difficult when somebody is desperate to be published, and they're going to big up their research findings. And the other problem, the flip side of inflation, is geographical inflation. If your journal has an impact factor, you will be more likely to receive submissions than if you don't have an impact factor. And you'll be more likely to receive submissions from authors that need to publish in impact factor journals than perhaps the researchers in areas which is not so important. So inflation of submissions is another problem. And authors around the world are under huge pressure to publish. And these are just a couple of examples. These are real-life examples, because authors are pressured not just to publish, but to publish in the quote-unquote right journals. India. The MCI and the DCI, so it's the Medical Council of India and the Dental Council of India, and the UCG, the University Council, have revised their list of accredited journals just recently. And if you don't publish your article in one of the accredited journals, you don't get accreditation. And several authors have got caught in this. And I know one editor that got an article submitted to him because the author said, I've already had this published. I'm being transparent. I'm not trying to hide this. This article has already been published. But it was published in a journal which, when I submitted it, was on the accredited list. But that's now no longer on the accredited list. So I've got to publish somewhere else. Because if I don't publish somewhere else, my job's on the line. And this is my research. So can you publish my article? So, this is an author who has been let down by their system because suddenly their work is not accredited in a way that it has to be for them to retain their job. I've had examples of an article I received, a really good article, I accepted it, and when I accepted it, I said, this is not original research, this is a case study. So therefore, it will be classified as a case study in the journal. And the author said, please don't do that, because if you do that, it doesn't count as an original article, and I won't get accreditation. So can you reclassify my article? Because if you don't do it, I don't get the accreditation. Malaysia and Nigeria, and I'm sure there's other countries. If you're within Nigeria, if you publish in a Nigerian journal, that article is not recognized within the accreditation system in Nigeria, and the same in Malaysia. It doesn't matter how good that Nigerian journal is, it's not recognized, because it's not again, excuse the quotation marks again, but it's not an international journal, and there is concern over bias and conflict of interest. Now, of course, this is hugely problematic for the researchers, but it's also problematic for the journal editors, because they lose all the good research within these areas. And there's naivety. I made a mistake, can I republish with you? And this came up just recently. I was asked by a researcher, her group had submitted to a journal and they were published, and it was great. They then realized it was a fraudulent journal. And the journal said it had an impact factor. It didn't have an impact factor. It said it was indexed in all these places. It wasn't indexed in all these places. Now, okay, maybe the authors were a bit dumb to have submitted to this journal, but they did, and they got published. But of course, no accreditation. So they said, oh, well, in which case we made a mistake, so can we withdraw from that journal and publish our article with you? Well, what do you do in something like that? Is it duplicate publication? So there are a lot of issues with that, and a lot of naivety within authors about how to publish and the ethics of publishing, leading them into potential career problems. So how do editors respond? Do you open the window? Or do you shut the window firmly? Do you say, actually, no, I'm not going to accept articles from these other regions because they're too problematic and I don't trust them and I'm a bit suspicious? Hopefully, editors don't. hopefully editors are ethical enough, because we need to be ethical as well, to actually look dispassionately on all submissions and consider them. But what strategies do we need to engage when we're receiving articles from all around the world and we're receiving a higher volume of articles? So this is what I do. This is not necessarily right, but this is what I do. Don't worry about the language, just look at the content. So when articles are sent to reviewers, and I know there are issues with the language, I say to the reviewers, look, I know this is really tricky, but can you just tell me whether you think there's something good in that article? And if there is, we can worry about the language later. You know, we can deal with that later, but can you tell me if there's something good in that article? But that's not always easy for reviewers, because sometimes they can't even tell if there's something good in the article because it's written so badly. Extra TLC. As a journal, we do tender loving care to all our authors, but we give that extra bit to the non-native English speakers. And I'm far more tolerant of badly written or badly structured articles if they're coming from non-native English speakers than I am for English speakers. Potential authors, please take note of this. And extra feedback, extra work. If an author is coming from an area where obviously they're struggling with the language, but there seems to be good stuff in their article, we give them a lot more feedback. So instead of a reviewer report of 50 lines, they'll get a couple of pages. They'll get an annotated Word file coming back saying, this paragraph doesn't say this. Do you mean to say this? We try and clarify things with them. But of course, we don't do that for English speakers. Basically, you're on your own, guys. You've got to get it right. But it's also good for us because it means that we need to improve our focus. Actually, what is it we really want to publish? And this leads me on to the problems with this kind of approach. First one, time, biggest issue. It takes a lot more time to deal with an article that is badly written, badly structured, badly argued, but you want to publish it because it's got good stuff in. So time is a really big issue. I published an article a couple of years ago. I'd like some of your sympathy. It was 15,000 words when it was submitted. I mean, basically it was a small book. But it had really good stuff in it. We managed to whittle it down to about 7,000 words. I reckon I must have spent a week working on this article. And frankly, between you and me, but don't tell anybody, I deserve to be a named author on this article. It took a lot of work. Anyway, we did publish it, and it's a really good article, and I'm not going to tell you which one it is. So really good. But that's a heck of a lot of time, and you don't always have that time. This is a little bit of a tricky one, lower quality articles, and particularly fewer citations. Now, fortunately, I'm in an area where impact factor is not important, except for last year when we went below 1 and I was gutted. But, impact factor, if you're an editor and you're trying to make an impact with your journal and getting a good impact, you don't get a high impact factor if you're publishing peripheral articles that are not going to get cited. And that will affect editorial judgments. It's not fair, it's not right, but it will affect editorial judgments because they don't get cited. And I know in our journal we've published some exceptionally good and important articles, and they get very little attention. But they're there. If you really want to know about Pakistan research, if you want to know about Chinese research, you may only want to know once in your life, but you'll find it in the journal because we've got those articles. We have published them, but they don't do a huge amount of good for our journal in terms of citations and social traction. So we need to bear that in mind. Focus. I said about the focus thing. It's really difficult. You get these bright, shiny articles, and it's new stuff. This is new information that you're not getting from anywhere because you haven't seen that article coming out of Malaysia, coming out of India, coming out of Sri Lanka, and you're getting new information, and it's really shiny. So you're very tempted to publish it, and that can lead you away from your core focus. And so that's the bright, shiny articles. And this is a tricky one, power. If an author is desperate to publish, and a lot of authors who are coming out from the emerging countries are desperate to publish in the in the developed impact factor journals, they will do anything you ask them to do. So with an author from the USA, if it goes back to the review saying you need to clarify this, you need to do this, quite often they'll push back and they'll say, I don't think I do. I actually think this is clear enough. And they'll make an argument for it. But if you're getting an author from, I don't know, Nigeria, and you rewrite their article for them, they just say yes, because you're the one with the power. And that, as an editor, you've got to be so careful about, because very easy to abuse your power. And the elephant in the room, and this really is the big elephant in the room, is it right for me to be publishing articles which are not going to reach those readers that actually need that information? I'm a subscription journal. If I'm publishing important information coming out of Kenya, coming out of Malawi, coming out of Sri Lanka, coming out of Russia, and actually that's research that needs to get to researchers in that country who don't get access to that journal because it's a subscription journal, actually, am I doing the right thing to publish that? Would it not be better for that journal to be published in a local national journal which will reach the right readers? And this is a real elephant in the room. We actually, and Phil knows I have quite strong feelings on this, we need to actually build a much better, stronger and sustainable national journal environment than we have at the moment. So that, I think, a bit of an elephant in the room. And my final answer to all this, and I have the answer to all of this, and this is the second Douglas Adams question here. I don't have the answer. This is the best answer I could come up with, 42. Make out of it what you will. It's a big challenge for us, and I don't think we've found the right answers yet. Thank you.